Elton Welsby, it's great to see you.
And
We're
you.
here to talk about the release of your book, which chronicles your career in broadcasting, called Game for a Laugh.
Yeah.
How much of a laugh was it putting together, going back through the annals of your career, Elton?
The biggest regret, Andy, that I have when I went into and started the process of writing the book was I've never kept a diary. So all the stories in the book, of which there are plenty, they're all so funny or so memorable that you couldn't possibly forget them, But I'm sure there'll be others that I would have been able to put in had I kept a diary that I couldn't remember. But the ones I remember were just so outrageously good. Wonderful memories that, had a lot of fun compiling it with Gary Cook, my sort of co-author, if you like. I thoroughly enjoyed the project. It was a long process. It was about 10 months.
Your career has spanned the newspaper industry, the radio and the television. Is there a medium that when you look back that you think, I had the most fun doing that?
The most fun I think I had during my career, which started in the newspaper business around about 1970, was in 1974 when I went to Radio City, Merseyside's brand new independent local radio station. And we were all pioneers. And there's some great names from that era who became somewhat household names. Paul Davis of ITN, for example. Nick Pollard, who was our news editor, who ended up being the top news guy in the country. News at 10, he ran that. He ran Sky News for a while. We were all thrust in together as pioneers, of commercial radio. And it was great fun. Boy, did we make some mistakes. Oh, we had some howlers. But we all learnt on the job. And we were self-taught in terms of the radio, But we loved it, and we all got on well. We had our 50th anniversary on October the 24th this year at the Cavern in Liverpool. The 50th anniversary of Radio City. We all got together. It was like we'd never been apart. It was incredible. Band of brothers.
It must have been special times, and special times in terms of sport in the Merseyside area back then when you started.
Well, when you think about it, Bill Shankly had just left Liverpool. Everton it's just 4 years since they won the title, admittedly, but Everton were in the doldrums, really. But Liverpool, of course, had this transition between Shankly and Paisley, and I got in on that kind of thing. And I became the voice of Anfield. And I'm an Evertonian, and I became the voice of Anfield because of my 3.5 to 4 years at Radio City. And it was wonderful, a wonderful time. Without any disrespect intended, I always said that, I could have been better than I was, but working for Radio Cumbria, covering Carlisle, nobody would have heard what I was doing, But because it was Liverpool, at home and abroad in Europe, they were conquering Europe. It was fantastic.
When you look back on those times in the 1970s, Elton, covering sport on the radio, it was a much different time, of course. People didn't have wall-to-wall football coverage on the television. So many people were so heavily reliant on your coverage. How much did you know about that back then, Elton, that you were potentially, and your colleagues at the BBC and Merseyside and other radio stations, Radio 2, were the only place really where you would get your football if you weren't there?
I was aware of it because prior to going on to Radio City, I used to listen to Radio Merseyside for away games that I couldn't get to, etc. So I knew of the popularity of local radio and how integral it was, really, keeping supporters of both Liverpool and Everton in touch with what was going on, especially on match days when either Everton or Liverpool happened to be away. Not everyone could go to the away games. So it was vitally important for the fans. And I have to say the clubs particularly Liverpool, was so accommodating. I know we do, for example, at the home games, Liverpool's home games, we weren't allowed to do full commentary. We do sort of 3 or 4 30-second updates for the first half, and then for the second. But Peter Robinson, the club secretary at Liverpool at the time, finest administrator, by the way, that I've ever come across in my time involved in football. Peter Robinson used to come at half-time and say, "Oh, you know, we can't get any more in. It's a full house. You know, go ahead, just do commentary for those who can't be here." And so even though we weren't allowed to, but in terms of the contract, if the club said you can do commentary, then fine, so be it. We did. And so even at home games, you know, I do full second half commentary on Liverpool's games.
There will be people who remember you as the presenter, the broadcaster, the anchorman, so to speak.
Yes.
But in radio terms, you were the commentator as well, weren't you?
Yes. Well, I think people who remember, who are old enough to remember how I used to operate at Radio City, won't remember me in any way, shape or form as a presenter. It was purely as a commentator.
But everybody outside of the Merseyside area, really, who didn't get Radio City, from Granada and when you moved on and back to radio towards the end of your career, they only really remember Elton Welsby, the front man, don't they?
Absolutely, yeah. And that was something. When I went to Granada from City, I did 2 commentaries, and that because Gerald Sinstad, you know, wasn't particularly well. He had Bell's palsy. And so I had to do 2 commentaries. So Gerald was basically off commentary duty for a fortnight. And I did 2 commentaries. One was Everton against Bristol City, which was a great thrill. And then the following week, I did Manchester United against Arsenal. But I did a spell of presenting kickoff for, it was probably 6 or 7 weeks before Gerald came back and could perform in Vision. And so that really, that illness to Gerald gave me a stepping stone, which I probably wouldn't have got for, let's say, another 6 to 9 months, maybe. I don't know, but it certainly accelerated my progress.
I think people who grew up, Elton, in the Granada region will remember Kick-Off as an iconic program.
Very much so.
Remember the theme tunes, remember everything, remember Dennis Law, who was sat with you so often, and so many other great guests as well. And later on, people like Rob McCaffrey and Rob Palmer, who were with
That's
you.
absolutely right. You're talking about great names from your region. Jimmy Armfield was my first co-presenter, if you like.
Just tell us about Jimmy. What was he like to work with?
He was fantastic. We had a gentleman. I mean, in the truest sense of the word. One of the kickoff items was one Christmas. We had the kickoff Christmas choir, where one player from every one of the 17 clubs in our region came and sang a Christmas carols in the studio in Manchester. Now, today I would say that would be impossible that you could get one player from each of the 17 clubs in the region to come and sing Christmas carols on a Thursday afternoon. Absolutely impossible. Very difficult then, but we managed it. And Jimmy conducted the Christmas choir. So we had a few rehearsals, and he'd say, "Macari, could you just sing up a bit there?" And, you know, "Shannon, stop waving your arm about." You know, and he'd conduct the choir, and it was absolutely, it was fantastic. But that was, Jimmy knocked that together. I'll tell you a story. We got Bob Lord in to do an interview. Now, Bob Lord was notoriously, this is the former Burnley chairman, ex-president of the Football League for a short time. He was an interim position there with the Football League. And it was a sensitive issue, which I can't remember what it was, but we invited him to come and be a studio guest on Kickoff, and Jimmy was going to do the interview. And Bob Lord said, apparently said, I'll do it as long as I can meet that Ina Sharples. And so we go, what? You know, as long as I can meet that Ina Sharples. Wait, we had to go through Coronation Street. The executive producer Coronation Street, a fellow called Bill Podmore. Could we possibly, you know, interview Violet Carson? Not interviews, borrow Violet Carson to introduce him to our studio guest, Bob Lord, because if that doesn't happen, Bob Lord won't come in. Anyway, all sorted out. And Bob Lord came in, and he was looked after by one of our PAs called Ursula Coburn. And he said, right, I want to meet that Ina Sharples before I do this programme. And I said, well, Miss Carson is almost ready. We'll be able to meet her in a couple of minutes, Violet Carson. I don't want to meet no Miss Carson. I want to meet Ina Sharples. I mean, it's a soap opera, man, you know. It was incredible. He seemed to believe that it was... She played herself, if you know, and Violet Carson wasn't the actress who played Ina Sharples. It was incredible. Never forget that.
Just on those days at Key Street, Elton, Coronation Street filmed right where you're doing your television as well. Did paths cross a lot between the actors and the television people?
Well, we always used to go to the Granada pub, the old school, on a Friday night, and so did the Coronation Street cast. And it was exclusively for Granada personnel, you know. You couldn't walk in off the street into this pub. And I used to meet them. Used to meet all of them, who were then, you know, on the show in those days, which was the early '80s. So the ones who I still watch on the street now will be Michael Lavelle, Kevin Webster. My big mate from the street at the time was Chris Quentin. But yes, we had there was one incident, I've forgotten their real names, but where Vera Duckworth was with Ivy Tilsley in the Granada pub. Now, one of them was particularly inebriated and dropped 20 quid. I'll tell you, it was Ivy who was, and Vera was helping her out of the place because she could hardly move, the little one. And she dropped £20 on the floor. And I noticed this, and I went and picked up the 20 quid and went over to Vera, Liz Dawn, and Liz, £20, she dropped it on the floor. Oh, thank you very much. Oh, God, love us. Oh, that's fantastic, love. Thank you very much. Go and get yourself a drink behind the bar. Gave me the 20 quid back, you know. We didn't need it, but she insisted.
When you went to television, Elton, how many doors did it open for you that you're a regional television broadcaster and a few years down the line you're a national sports broadcaster covering Olympics and World Cups?
Yeah. The doors were immediately opened in the Granada region. Now, so the doors were open at Man United, Man City, Liverpool, Everton, Blackburn, Burnley, etc. So you didn't need much more than that to start with. And that was primarily due to my boss, Paul Doherty, who's the son of Peter Doherty, legendary inside forward for Blackpool, Man City, Doncaster Rovers, and manager of Northern Ireland for 11 years. In fact, he took them to the 1958 World Cup finals. So the doors were opened by him for me rather than me opening the doors myself. And then, obviously, I became pretty well known in the Northwest. And when teams used to come up from, say, London or the Midlands to play up here, then we might invite the manager of that club into the studio on the Friday night prior to the Saturday kickoff. And, then I'd get to know them. So, then the name would spread to other areas of the country, like the Midlands, the most important ones, the North East, the Midlands, and London.
I always bang on about it so much. Relationships with people are so important in this industry with footballers and everybody. You were at a time where you knew basically all of these footballers and football managers, and they'd have been on the other end of the phone to you. Times have changed a lot now. Do you feel a great sense of pride and are you pleased, Elton, that you worked in the era that you did, that your access was...
Oh, very much so. Now it seems like you can't interview anyone without a load of advertising hoardings behind, you know? Back in my day, you pop down to the ground, even knock on the manager's door, say, hello, Bob, or whoever it might be, any chance for a quick couple of minutes? Yeah, sure. Players the same. You know, you go to a training session and pull a player out and just, you know, maybe just say to the manager, is it okay if I have a quick word with so-and-so? Yeah, sure, come on. It was so informal. And we knew each other on a personal level, too. It wasn't like, well, I'm the TV guy, I want to interview you. It was first name, always on a first name basis. And they realised that, you know, say the smaller clubs in the kick-off region all thought that I and Gerald hated them, you know, because we might be critical one particular week. Nothing could be further from the truth, because the better things were for, say, Rochdale, Morecambe, whoever, the better for them, the better for us.
If I had a pound for how many times a Preston North End fan has said to me, you know Elton Welsby, don't you? He hated us.
Yep. I didn't, but...
And you wonder why. And Tranmere Rovers, they must be his team.
Because the closest professional club to where I live is Tranmere. I get that all the time. All the time. Does it bother me? Not in the slightest.
The fact that they're talking about you and they're listening to every word you're saying just to find out if you're going to say anything derogatory about their club or positively.
I was in a local pub, this is a few years ago, and a fella came up to me and actually said something like, you know, you don't like Tranmere, you know, you live on the Wirral, you're not far from the... Why don't you like Tranmere? I said, I'm nothing against Tranmere whatsoever. He said, yeah, but you didn't half badmouth us, you know, a few weeks ago. We lost 6-0 at home and you were saying how badly we played. I thought, I'd give up.
I don't blame you. When you're in the Granada region, Elton, and then Brian Moore was the legendary voice of ITV football and sadly missed. And I think if I remember rightly, Elton, he was he retired and sadly passed away very quickly after he'd retired. But he was the face, he was the presenter, he was the commentator, he was everything in ITV football. And I think I'm right in saying the World Cup in 1990 changed that he was in Italy and you were in London and Italy as well.
I wasn't in London at all.
Never?
1990, no.
Okay.
It was the first time live football from the stadia was presented. There was Nick Owen in London, and we became known as the Travelling Wilburys, the ITV team that went to each and co-presented from each of the stadia. And that was revolutionary in TV terms. They didn't think it was going to work technically. It was a very difficult job for the engineers to sort of come up with a way of doing it. And they weren't sure it was going to work. That's probably a better way of putting it. But it did, you know. We had our little teething troubles to start with, but once we got into the routine, we were going from match to match to match all over Italy, you know. We go from Naples to Turin, for example. We'd be in Palermo, Sicily, and then be somewhere else, wherever, Rome, you know. It was fantastic. I really enjoyed that trip, but it was so tiring. That was the thing, so tiring.
I think I remember you telling me in the past, Elton, that in order to hear talkback from the studio, you needed special earpieces to drown out the noise.
We were... me as the presenter with a guest alongside me. It could be, there was Emlyn Hughes, Rodney Marsh, but in the main Graham Taylor. but I had to listen to instructions from down my earpiece, and I had to have a special earpiece because we were stuck in the middle of the crowd. We didn't have a nice little studio somewhere. We were literally stuck into the crowd. So, and they were very noisy as well, raucous. So I had to have a special earpiece made which blocked out all the outside noise, and I could hear the instructions coming in my ear. Des Lynam tried it, because the BBC tried to emulate what we were doing for a couple of games. It might have been the semi-final. There's a game before that, I think, and Desmond came out, and he wasn't warned or didn't realise that it was totally different than sat in a studio in London, and he couldn't hear what he was meant to be what he was being told to do, and apparently it showed on TV.
Which did you prefer, the comfort of the studio or being out on location?
It was exhilarating being, being in the crowd with a famous, figure from football, and setting the scene, and then at half time going through what happened, what might happen in the second half, etc., and then the conclusion at the end, doing it from in the stadium, surrounded by fans who were either happy, but at the end who were either happy or unhappy. It largely depended on where you were in the ground at the time, as to whether you were jubilant supporters or otherwise. That was just fantastic. Yeah. You had to get used to it, by the way. It wasn't, because those of us who are so used to studios, where everything is controlled, when you're out there, it's not so much.
So many people will remember the match on a Sunday afternoon as being an appointment to watch. It was the only live football we got of the First Division, apart from FA Cup finals and that sort of thing, Elton. I remember about a couple of months ago, October time, it was the anniversary of a certain game, and it was actually the first game of the season televised, which was the end of October. It wasn't the case that the match would start in early August and run all the way through, was it? There wasn't a game every Sunday.
No, there wasn't. I've forgotten how many we were able to do so many live games during the course of the contract. We could pick which ones. In other words, we could do 3 on the spin, but that probably meant that we couldn't do another one for, say, 3 or 4 weeks. We just had to fill that quota of so many. I honestly can't remember how many it was. To me, it seemed like every week, but it wasn't.
I think the most iconic one's probably the Liverpool-Arsenal Friday night championship decider. And so many people have said since, and it is a long time ago now, that you came on air probably 5 minutes before kickoff because Coronation Street had been on. Arsenal got the trophy and you were straight off for news at 10.
Well, that's not strictly true. The kickoff was delayed by 15 minutes.
Right.
So we had quite a bit of time at the top of the show to paint the scene with Sir Bobby Robson, of course, who's my studio guest. At the end, yes, it was a little bit tight for time to get the presentation. No one had anticipated that Arsenal would get the trophy, and it was a late bit of organisation by Liverpool Football Club, the league, to get Arsenal set up to actually retrieve the trophy, because everyone thought it was going to be presented to Liverpool. Almost a foregone conclusion. Well, Liverpool, will win tonight, or avoid getting beaten by 2 clear goals. But no, so it was hastily arranged for Arsenal to get the trophy. Jim Rosenthal was down there in the crowd, in the crowd of players, and he interviewed Tony Adams and a couple of others. And it went very quickly, and it came back to me, and all I had time to say was, "Thank you, Bob. Thanks to Sir Bob." And we're off, because in those days, ITN was sacrosanct. ITN it was 10 o'clock, news at 10. ITV never missed hitting news at 10, bang on 10 o'clock. Nowadays, I'm a celebrity, get me out of here, pushing it back by 35 minutes. You seem to be able to, it didn't used to be a movable feast, but now it seems it is.
Do you think that format of being on close to kick-off and going off closely after the game, Elton, is missed by people? Do you think sometimes we're going to have too much analysis?
Very much. People just think I'm saying this, but I believe if you were given the choice to watch the way we used to do it to the way it's done now, then I think people would choose to do the way we did it. Come on, paint the scene, have a brief chat with a different studio guest than like someone who's with us every single week, and then get into the match. I think now if people were to ask which they preferred, they would say that way. I mean, what was it last night? I was watching a game that kicked off at 8:00, and the programme started at 6:30. There's only so much you can say about it. Not for me.
The front of your book, Jack Charlton, is a photograph on there, Elton. When you look back at your broadcasting career, you've had Brian Clough with you, Sir Bobby Robson you've mentioned, Sir Kenny Dalglish. The list goes on. We could be here all day. Jack Charlton and Brian Clough are these days looked at as such iconic footballing figures who their interviews are wonderful still to watch to this day. What were they like to work with?
I have to say, first of all, can I take Jack? Jack and I became great mates, and we used to do stage work as well as TV work, and he'd stay with me as well. We just became very good friends. Don't ask me why. I've no idea. We just did. We had chemistry. We clicked. I could say the same for Cloughie, but with Cloughie, you always had to be on your toes. You never knew what was going to happen with Brian Clough. He could cut you in half with his tongue. Having said that, I found working with Cloughie exhilarating. It was great, as I said, because you had to be on your toes. You never knew what he was going to say or what he was going to do.
And this is live television.
Live. Oh, yes. Yeah. But I write in the book, I got away unscathed yet again because I never had a problem with Cloughie. I must be the only guy on television back then, apart from Brian Moore, who never had a problem with Cloughie.
He was a genius, wasn't he?
Well, look at what he did. Okay, to win the title at Derby, having got them promotion, that was something special. But what he did at Nottingham Forest, promotion, the title, 2 European Cups, was it 4 League Cups? I think it was. Absolutely phenomenal record. And yet the FA, when they had the chance, didn't want to appoint him as England manager because they thought he would probably cause too much trouble. And I have to say they were probably right in that respect, but they still should have gone with him.
Whoever you chose was a personality. They didn't come out with sound bites, did they? They all had their own opinion and weren't afraid to use it.
Well, I say compare it with today. We have a sort of a diet of Gary Neville, Jamie Carragher, Jamie Redknapp, and that's pretty much it, isn't it? The odd guest comes and joins them. We used to change it every week. I couldn't tell you the number of people we had as studio guests. There are certain ones that stick out. Always enjoyed working with George Best, for example, Sir Bobby Robson, Big Jack, Cloughie, and there were so many more who just do on a one-off basis because they had a connection with one or both of the clubs that we were covering that day. So it gave it a bit more of a spontaneity, and it was different, so you got different views. I mean, I respect Gary Neville enormously. I think possibly he'll end up running football one day, but I do get fed up of him every now and again. Even though I've got a lot of time for him, I think, change the record,
Just in terms of your regional television work, Elton, the ITV franchises were all sort of independent of each other and could put different programmes on at different times. Times have changed so much that that's not really the case anymore. How much did it help at Granada, like a product like Kickoff could be on the television, whereas today it probably couldn't?
Well, you just got to look at the way the ITV franchises have gone. There's no such thing as a local programme anymore, apart from the local news, like Granada Reports. You name me another local programme that goes on Granada, there isn't one.
There might be a politics debate, maybe.
Every now and again, there's the Granada debate. Yes, there is. But the thing about the local programmes, you can't sell them. There's no sell-on value. And the cost-cutting at Granada really started in the late 90s. You could see it coming. Budgets were cut back, local programmes would decrease, and now they're just non-existent.
I saw someone ask you actually on social media about why don't they bring back Granada Soccer Night? Well, and I think your answer was, well, the rights would mean that is an impossibility.
Totally impossible. We don't have rights. So ITV do not have rights to the Premier League in any shape or form. They do to the FA Cup. So maybe if Granada was interested in putting out a local football programme at night and call it Granada Soccer Night, then you could probably do it on the FA Cup replays. But there won't be replays in the FA Cup for very much longer. Oh, no. It's an impossibility. It's a great shame, but it's an impossibility now. Granada Soccer Night was a great a great service for Northwest football fans. It was wonderful to do. It could last an hour, or it could last 2 hours. It just depended on how many games we had that particular night. In the main, it was a 2-hour show, 10:30 after news at 10, 10:30 sometimes till 12:30, and you get like 3 or 4 main games, and then pick up all the sort of lower division matches that have been played that night as well, or the previous night. It was a great football programme, that.
I'll always remember another programme that you fronted as well, Elton, that people might think, I'm really sad to remember all this, but about 5 o'clock or 5:05, there'd be a goals roundup on a Saturday on Granada that you would front, and we would see goals that had literally gone in at 3 o'clock.
I think it was earlier than... I can't remember, Andy.
It's basically on the whistle, wasn't it? As soon as I finish...
Pretty much. I think it would have been 5 o'clock. And maybe someone who's listening to this will say, "Oh no, it wasn't. It was." I really can't remember. It's that long ago.
I think it was.
But it was very, very quickly. I know we had no script, no running order. We had a list of games that where we had cameras at, and sometimes, depending on which ground we're talking about, a bike would hurtle back with the first half action, to be edited. So we had no idea in which order the games would be available, and I'd say it's the most nerve-wracking live TV I've ever done. I think
it didn't look like it from where you're watching as a viewer, but there's no auto cue for that, is there?
I've never used auto cue.
Never.
Only once. That was when Bill Shankly died, and we did a tribute program to Bill the night he died, and a fellow called John Roberts of the Daily Mail wrote the script, and I presented the show. But because he'd written the script, the words were unfamiliar to me, and you couldn't dip with, and the very nature of that program, you couldn't deviate from the script that was written. It had to be as it was. So it was on autocue, and I read it, and that's the only time I used autocue.
Were you disappointed not to be the front man for the '94 World Cup, Elton, after the success of '90?
I was exclusively working for Granada at that point. I should, I suppose, have presented the European coverage from 92 onwards. But sometimes on European nights, Granada would decide that they wanted to do, let's say, a Manchester United game, whereas the network were going to show an Arsenal game, and Granada would opt out and show the United game or the Liverpool game, whichever it happened to be, the main Northwest game in Europe. So I was unable to commit to that series because I committed to Granada from 92 onwards when the Premier League came about, and we'd lost the contract to cover the live top flight football. And so, hey, working for Granada was, and Paul Doherty was, in some respects, all I ever wanted to do. All the other stuff was a bit of a bonus, really. So I didn't miss not presenting the European football. It didn't bother me. I had other things that I thoroughly enjoyed doing at Granada,
You'll have worked with Saint and Greavesy on a number of occasions.
Many. I used to. Saint and Greavesy started mid-80s, wasn't it? Roughly the same time, 86, the same time as the Results programme, which I used to present for the network from London Weekend Television. And the Saint and Greavesy used to go out at the what was it? Was it just after 1 o'clock? But somewhere around there, from London Weekend Television. So I'd sometimes do an interview for the Saint and Greavesy programme in the morning, get it back. Someone would edit it, and then it would go on the Saint and Greavesy show. So I used to watch the Saint and Greavesy show from, sat next to the producer and the director, and it was great fun. That there'll never be another Saint and Greavesy, no matter who they try and put as the main characters. If it were ever thought of trying to emulate that in some way, I just couldn't see it.
I want to ask you about Kenny Dalglish, who's a synonymous name with Northwest football, and to Radio Lancashire listeners from his time with Blackburn Rovers. Yeah. His playing career and managerial career was magnificent. Just how surprised were you the day that Noel White, the Liverpool chairman at the time, announced, with Kenny sat next to him, that he was to step down as Liverpool manager?
I'll tell you a story that's in my book. I was playing golf on that day, and my wife at the time, Joyce, I was playing a hole at Heswell Golf Club, and she came running over 2 fairways and the practice ground to get to me. And she was panting, she could hardly breathe. Kenny Dalglish. I thought she said Kenny Dalglish had died. True. And I just dropped everything and hurtled up to the professional shop to use the phone. And the guy in there, a fellow called Nick Pugh, he said, "All right, Elt, I see Kenny Dalglish has resigned." I went, "Oh, is that it?" That's absolutely true.
What a relief.
True. Oh, what a relief. Because Kenny and I, we got on ever so well.
He's not been a media person, I think it's fair to say, throughout his lifetime, Kenny, and probably avoided it when he could. But
never had a problem.
But in your time as a player and manager?
He was, we did a European night from Highbury during the 80s, and Kenny was studio guest. It was a double header, actually. There were 2 games, and he was fine. We used to joke about it, am I going to understand you today? Things like that. Did an interview him once on the pitch side at Anfield, and he had Paul in his arms, And at one point, Paul said something and made a grab for the mic. He was only 2. The kid was only 2 at the time. And I said to Kenny, "I can understand him better than you." He loved it. He loved it. But hey, the same guy, everyone thought, he can't put 2 words together. The same guy talking about the floral tributes at Anfield following the Hillsborough disaster. He came out with, "I've never seen anything so beautiful or so tragic." Wow. That was one powerful statement.
That can't have been an easy time.
Listen, Kenny, Marina, the players, their wives, they became counsellors. Professional footballers aren't trained for things like that. They did a magnificent job for Merseyside. The first match that we covered after Hillsborough was Liverpool against Everton on a Wednesday night. Craig Johnson had flown over to help with those who were grieving, and he was our studio guest. The match didn't matter. It was about Merseyside showing its unity. There were red and white scarves and blue and white scarves tied together and going around the ground. And as I say, the match finished goalless, but it just didn't matter. What mattered was that through the keyhole of the match, the rest of the country saw what a strong community spirit that Merseyside has, I'll never forget that night.
When Kenny stepped down, who would have thought in the same calendar year that he would return to a second division club, Blackburn Rovers, who'd been taken over maybe a year or two earlier by Jack Walker. You'll have been working in the region, of course, during that time, Elton.
Yeah.
You won't have seen it coming, will you? This club bidding for Gary Lineker and Ian Rush and everybody else, and eventually
Alan Shearer.
Unbelievable. Yeah. When Kenny returned to football, were you surprised it was in the second division?
I suppose I was at the time. I knew that with Jack Walker, he's going to have a lot of money to spend, and getting out of the second division almost a formality. The fact that they went on and won the championship, well, that was something else. But yeah, I suppose I was surprised, I have to say, but on the other hand, I thought he's done this for a reason, because Kenny doesn't do anything without a reason. The reason would have been Jack Walker's millions, because no financial fair play in those days, and if Jack Walker wanted to spend 10 million on a squad of players, which was a lot of money back then so be it. Go ahead. Kenny knew that.
You fronted the playoff final coverage from Wembley Stadium in '92 when Blackburn Rovers beat Leicester.
Yes.
And I think for anybody who was at that game will remember the heat and how excruciatingly hot it was that day. You had Lenny Lawrence with you.
We were there for the weekend.
Yes. And Blackpool played the day before.
Yep. And it was oppressive, the heat. It really was. But it was great. I was delighted for Jack, obviously, Kenny, and some of the players who I knew. But who would have thought? Who would have thought what they were going to achieve?
Is there an element of sadness, Elton, in modern day football, that if me or you was to win Euro millions and become billionaires overnight, that we couldn't replicate what Jack Walker's done for our own clubs and say, I'm going to buy Stockport County, for example, and I'm going to turn them into Premier League powerhouses? Is it sad that can't happen now due to the rules of the game?
It's very, very sad. I personally, I'm delighted I had the time I had. At the time I had it. Nowadays, there's so much in football of which I'm disillusioned. And that's one of them. Newcastle, for example, they are the richest club in the world. The world. They could buy anybody. Let's say Messi was a few years younger. They could go and buy Messi, but they can't. Because it doesn't comply with the financial fair play. Crazy.
Does it remove a bit of the enjoyment for the supporter who can't see their team, can't see the end game in some ways?
I think it's... I don't think the fans fully understand it. I think they've just got a basic knowledge that your expenditure can't receive what you can't exceed too much by what you bring in. I think it's puzzling to the fans, say the Newcastle fans, as you rightly mentioned right now, who know that they are owned by the richest owners in football, club football, and they can't spend that money. It's crazy.
Is there a?
I don't like it. I don't like it actually, because to me it seems to be penalising private enterprise.
So you're an Evertonian. What they're on the verge of a takeover. What's the end game for them, Elton? How do they get back to challenging for European places without having to break the rules?
Very, very, very impossible. In the short term, totally impossible. People who think the freaking group come in, maybe spend a little bit in the January transfer window. I'm not sure. Then next summer, how much they'll get. But Everton doesn't generate a lot of money. That's the problem. It's not it's not a club which is known, supported worldwide like Liverpool, Man United, those sort of clubs. I'm very fearful for Everton, to be honest with you. I think it's vitally important that we survive in the Premier League this season and go into Bramley-Moore Dock as a Premier League club, not in the Championship, because I think we'd find it very difficult to get out of the Championship.
When you look back, Elton, I know you say you've no diaries to refer back to here, but is there a moment in your career that stands out for you that you might have stood there that day when the broadcast is over and thought, that'll take some beating? That's my best day in broadcasting.
1989, Anfield, Liverpool 0, Arsenal 2. Now, people say, oh, you're only saying that because you're an Everton fan. Rubbish. That was history. The climax of a top flight English football season will never, ever come down to the top two going head to head with the away team, and some would say the inferior team, having to win by 2 clear goals on that night. And don't forget, Liverpool had gone from January up until then unbeaten. That was history. People talk about Man City and the Aguero goal. No. It does not compare to what I witnessed and what the nation witnessed. But I was the presenter of that. And that will live long in the memory.
And just on that night, that I think a lot of people might find hard to believe now, if I remember it rightly, and I was much younger, obviously, I think Liverpool fans stayed and applauded Arsenal getting the trophy, because that's what they were like.
Yeah, very much so. In fact, the players took it worse than the fans. I think it might have been David O'Leary trying to console John Aldridge, obviously with the Irish connection there. And I think Aldo sort of, get out of it, leave me alone. But yeah, the fans appreciated what Arsenal had done. They didn't like it, for crying out loud, I mean, beforehand, and for the vast majority of the game, it was party time. Even when Arsenal were leading 1-0, no one thought that they would, the likelihood here will be Liverpool snatch an equaliser, but it wasn't to be.
Just as you were coming to the end at Granada, Elton, that there must have been so many of the front of house people like yourself who had been there for a very long time. Everyone of my generation will have grown up with Bob Greaves and Tony Wilson and Lucy Meacock, and Lucy's only just come away from Granada Television this year, hasn't she? But there were so many familiar faces who you were all a very similar sort of age, and did you get on all well?
We got on very well. Yeah, it was again. It's sort of a bit corny, but it was like a family. There was David Jones, Bob Smithies, who read the news, Patty Caldwell, as you rightly say, Bob, Gordon Burns, and Tony Wilson. My obviously my personal favourite, but
how talented was he, Elton?
Oh, immensely. You got the impression with Tony that if he had turned his attention and his talent to anything, he would have found a way of making it work. I mean, look what he did in the music scene in Manchester with the Hacienda. You know, it was almost working as a presenter at Granada and doing reports and different programming with Granada was almost like a second string to his bow. You know, what he really wanted to do was create music.
Yeah, some really big names. And when Granada, it came time for you to finish, you came back into independent radio again and experienced that.
That's where we met.
We certainly did at Century Radio with, and I think when I look back, all I look back on is fun. It was a great time and everybody had a good time together.
I did 2 years at Century. The first year I enjoyed immensely. I thought, wow, I could be doing this for a long time. I enjoyed it so much. The second year was ridiculously bad because they changed their policy. There had to be more music. Our Sunday program was virtually me being a DJ, which I didn't enjoy. But the first year was terrific. We used to do 2 hours. Here's me saying about television now, 2 hours build up. But we were building up to how many games? So it was fine. And we'd have the legends on the end of the line as well. Graham Sharp, Gary Owen, Alan Kennedy, Mickey Thomas, who we were calling up, who were all characters in their own right. It was really, as you say, it was enjoyable. It was fun.
And reflecting on those days as well as your days earlier, Elton, cricket you're a big fan of cricket. Rugby league, you're a big fan of. Football's not just you, is it? There's a lot of other sports as well. People will remember you fondly from the bowls at Blackpool.
The bowls at Blackpool and Ellesmere Port, where Granada's bowls coverage began at the Woodland Hotel, Ellesmere Port. The Bassmasters, which Paul Doherty came up this brainwave that we'll cover bowls and we'll make the Bassmasters the richest tournament in the history of the game. We thought, oh yeah, you keep thinking, Chief, that's what you're good at. He pulled it off, and bowls became quite a significant sport on Granada during the summer. We do 2 tournaments regularly, the Bassmasters and the Greenhill County Classic, and I enjoyed the weeks that we spent doing that. I enjoyed those as much as anything I've ever done, to be honest. And
we'd often get a random day of county cricket that you might find someone like Martin Tyler commentating.
That was very, very early on. That would have been early 80s. Yeah, we did the Roses match. We did a couple of Sunday league games when one day cricket was just the Sunday league. We did a couple of those. The only thing I really remember about was one day it rained in Manchester.
There's a shock.
It rained. There's a shock. Yeah, and we were doing it, and a guy called Richard Signey had written out the scores in a felt tip pen. The scores of the other games going on a Sunday all over the country, and it was raining. I was under an umbrella or something, and he shoved these scores to me, written in a felt tip pen. Of course, the rain got on it. I couldn't read them. But also, that was where I first met and became quite pally with Fred Truman, Fiery Fred, because he was a co-commentator. And we got on great. To tell you a story about Fred, not a nice story, unfortunately, a sad one. The school where my kids went to, they had organised a gentleman's evening, and they wanted a sports star. And I rang Fred and asked him whether he'd do it. Yeah, that was fine. This was about like a month or so beforehand. And anyway, I got a phone call on the day of the function to say that Fred couldn't do it. He wasn't very well. Well, okay. I phoned Alex Murphy, rugby league fame, if he could stand in, and he did. So the day was a couple of days, a few days later, Fred passed away.
That's sad.
So that was very sad.
Are there sports that you don't watch, Elton, or are you a keen viewer of most of them these days?
I think any sport played at a very high level is worth watching. So I'll include darts in that. Yeah, well, I say, as you know, I watch bowls. The rare occasion it's on television now, I'll watch that because I know a bit about it and I enjoy it very much. Golf, I watch. I'll watch the last 9 holes of a major. Rugby league, primarily when the Saints are on, because that's where I'm from originally. But yeah, I think any sport played at a really high. One I can't get into is Formula One, or anything where television tries to capture speed. It can't. It, for some reason, it fails. Even with cameras in the helmets of the drivers or on the car or wherever, it just can't. It just can't capture the element of speed.
And just a final one, Elton, with looking through your book, and I'm very much looking forward to going through it all. When you reflect on your broadcasting career, there's clearly a talented presenter here who's had a great career, but do you also feel really fortunate to have experienced what you have?
Oh, extremely. A lot of it was, as I say, luck. It was being in the right time, being in the right place at the right time, etc. There's a lot of luck involved, but sometimes I do look back and think this little old man who lives on the Wirral now, crikey, didn't half achieve a lot really.